On a cool October evening, Dr. Elias Vance, his wife Dr. Anaya Vance, and their two children were celebrating at an upscale Italian bistro when an off-duty police officer, Keith Rorick, took offense to the sound of their family's laughter. Believing them to be a rowdy group, unfit for the establishment, Rorick called for on-duty backup to have them forcibly removed. The incident, which began with a complaint rooted in racial bias, escalated into a tense confrontation that ended with the officer's public humiliation and a $19 million lawsuit. After it was revealed the family he targeted were not only the personal guests of the restaurant's owners, but also held significant power and influence within the city. The warm glow of Trattoria Bella Vista's dining room was a stark contrast to the cold sterility of the operating theaters where Dr. Elias Vance spent most of his days. Here, the air was thick with the scent of garlic, oregano, and simmering marinara, a welcome respite from the antiseptic smell of his profession. He watched his wife, Anaya, her eyes sparkling under the soft pendant lighting as she recounted a funny story from her first week as the new chief of pediatrics at City General. Their son, Jamal, 16 and trying his best to look too cool for a family dinner, couldn't suppress a grin. 14-year-old Simone was laughing freely, a bright, musical sound that made Elias's heart ache with a fierce, protective love. They were celebrating. Anaya's promotion was a monumental achievement, the culmination of years of relentless work and dedication. They had chosen Bella Vista because it was special, a place owned by Antonio and Sofia Moretti, old friends whose lives had become intertwined with theirs years ago when Elias had performed a complex, life-saving cardiac surgery on Antonio's father. They were more than patrons. They were family. They shared a tiramisu, their laughter occasionally bubbling up, but never rising above the convivial hum of the packed restaurant. It was the sound of a happy family, of black joy in a space they had every right to occupy. But their joy was being watched. 2 tables away, a man sat alone, his posture rigid, his gaze a fixed, hostile glare. He was a thick-set man in his late 40s with a military-style haircut and a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl. Elias had noticed him earlier, had felt the weight of his stare, a familiar and unwelcome sensation he had learned to navigate throughout his life. He ignored it, focusing instead on his daughter's animated retelling of a school play rehearsal. He would not let one man's prejudice curdle this perfect evening. The man, Officer Keith Rorick, though off-duty and in civilian clothes, carried his authority like a loaded weapon. To him, the Vances were not a family celebrating. They were an intrusion. Their laughter was not joyful, it was disruptive. Their presence was not welcome, it was a problem to be solved. He saw their skin color, and his mind filled in the rest of the story with ugly, worn-out stereotypes. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving with practiced efficiency. He didn't speak to the manager. He didn't address the family directly. He called his own. A few minutes later, the serene ambience of the restaurant was shattered by the flashing red and blue lights painting the large picture windows. 2 uniformed officers from the city's police department walked in, their presence immediately silencing conversations and turning heads. The junior officer, a young man named Peterson, looked uncertain, his eyes scanning the room. But behind him was a familiar face, the man from the other table, now wearing a smirk of vindication. Keith Rorick had summoned his colleagues to deal with the disturbance. He was no longer just a disgruntled diner. He was an officer of the law, and he was about to enforce his own private, bigoted peace. He approached the Vance family's table, his boots heavy on the polished hardwood floor. The junior officer trailed behind him, a silent, uneasy partner in the unfolding drama. "Folks," Rorick began, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, a calculated performance of authority. "We've had a complaint about a disturbance. A rowdy group causing a scene." Elias placed his fork down gently, his movements deliberate and calm. He looked from Rorick to the younger officer, then back. "Officer, I think there must be some mistake," he said, his tone even and respectful. "We were just finishing our dessert." Anaya's hand found his under the table, her grip firm. She had seen this play before, too. Rorick's smirk widened into a sneer. He gestured vaguely around the now silent room. "The complaint is about this table. Your table. Loud, disruptive, making other paying customers uncomfortable." His eyes lingered on Jamal, a clear, targeted insinuation. So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay your bill and leave. Quietly, the manager, a young man named Daniel who had been hired by the Morettis just a few months prior, hurried over, his face pale with anxiety. Officers, is there a problem? Everything seems fine here. Rorik didn't even look at him. His focus was entirely on Elias. This is a police matter now, son. Stay out of it. He turned back to Elias, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. I'm not asking again. Get up. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a tightening in Elias's chest that mimicked the very cardiac constrictions he spent his life fixing. He thought of the hundreds of hours he'd spent on his feet, saving lives without a thought to the patient's race or station. He thought of Anaya's brilliance, her gentle hands comforting sick children. He thought of his own children, who had been taught to meet the world with respect and confidence, only to have the world meet them with this ugly, unprovoked hostility. He would not be chased out of a restaurant like a stray dog. Not tonight. Not ever again. On what grounds are we being asked to leave, officer? Elias asked, his voice still steady, a rock against the tide of Rorik's aggression. We are guests here. In fact, we are the personal guests of the owners, Antonio and Sophia Moretti. Rorik let out a short, barking laugh. It was a sound full of derision and disbelief. Oh, you are you? Friends with the Morettis? I'm sure. You people always have a story, don't you? The phrase "you people" hung in the air, a toxic cloud that settled over the table. It was the final confirmation, the undeniable proof of the prejudice driving this encounter. The junior officer, Peterson, shifted his weight, his eyes darting from Rorik to the Vance family. A flicker of doubt, of deep unease, crossed his face. This was not a routine call. This felt wrong. The diners at the surrounding tables were no longer pretending not to watch. The soft clinking of cutlery had ceased. The room was a theater, and they were all unwilling audience members. A woman at a nearby table slowly, almost imperceptibly, raised her phone, its small black lens aimed directly at Officer Rorik. Then another phone went up, and another. The silent witnesses were becoming digital scribes, documenting the scene for a world that would soon be watching. Rorik seemed to draw energy from the attention, his arrogance swelling to fill the silent space. I don't care who you say you know. I am a sworn officer of the law, and I am giving you a lawful order to vacate these premises. You are causing a public nuisance. We were laughing, Anaya said, her voice cutting through the tension, sharp and clear as a scalpel. My daughter was telling a story, and we were laughing. Is black laughter a public nuisance now, officer? Rorik's face darkened with fury. He saw her challenge not as a legitimate question, but as insubordination. He took a step closer, invading their space, his shadow falling over the table. He pointed a thick finger at Elias. I've had enough of your lip. Both of you. You have 10 seconds to get on your feet before I physically remove you. And trust me, you don't want that. I'll charge you with resisting arrest and trespassing so fast your head will spin, Simone whimpered, shrinking back in her seat. Jamal's jaw was clenched, so tight a muscle pulsed in his cheek. He looked at his father, his eyes asking a silent question. What do we do? Elias met his son's gaze and gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. Stay calm. Let me handle this. He knew this was a precipice. Any sudden movement, any raised voice from his son, could be twisted and used as justification for the violence Rorik so clearly craved. His responsibility as a father, as a protector, was to de-escalate, to absorb the poison so his children wouldn't have to. But he would not surrender their dignity. Elias slowly pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. He was a tall man, but lean, without the brutish physicality of the officer before him. Yet, in that moment, he seemed to tower over Rorik. His composure was a form of power Rorik couldn't comprehend. Officer, Elias said, his voice now carrying a new edge, a hint of the authority he held in other rooms, in other contexts. Before this goes any further, I will need your name and your badge number. And your partner's as well, Rorik scoffed, but he was legally obligated to comply. It's Officer Rorik. Badge 714". He jerked a thumb toward his partner. That's Peterson, 922. Happy now? Are you going to write a letter to my mommy? The bitter irony was lost on him. He had no idea that Elias Vance didn't need to write letters. He made calls, and the people he called answered. Elias nodded slowly, committing the names and numbers to memory. He then took out his own phone. He didn't raise it to record. He simply unlocked the screen and navigated to his contacts. His movements were unhurried, a stark contrast to Rorick's agitated energy. "What do you think you're doing?" Rorick snapped, his patience gone. "Calling your lawyer? Go ahead. You can call him from the back of my squad car." "No," Elias said, his eyes finding Rorick's. "I'm calling the owner of this restaurant." "My friend." He pressed the call button and put the phone on speaker. The dial tone echoed unnaturally loud in the silent room. After 2 rings, a man's voice, warm and accented, answered. "Elias, my friend, is everything okay? Sophia and I were just talking about you, hoping you were enjoying the celebration for Anaya." The voice belonged to Antonio Moretti. Elias kept his gaze locked on Rorick, whose sneer was beginning to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Antonio," Elias said calmly, "I'm sorry to bother you. We're here at Bella Vista, but we're having a bit of a problem. There's an officer Rorick here who is insisting my family and I leave. He says we're causing a disturbance." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Antonio's voice returned, all warmth gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury that seemed to crackle through the phone's tiny speaker. "What? An officer? Let me speak to this man." Elias held the phone out toward Rorick. "He'd like a word with you." Rorick hesitated. The entire script had just been flipped. The narrative he had constructed in his mind, thugs in a nice restaurant, him as the hero restoring order, was crumbling around him. He snatched the phone from Elias's hand. "This is Officer Rorick, sir. There's been a public nuisance complaint." He didn't get to finish. Antonio Moretti's voice exploded from the phone, so loud that people several tables away flinched. "Rorick, what the hell do you think you're doing? Dr. Elias Vance and his family are my honored guests. He is the man who saved my father's life. He is my brother. You get your hands off him and you get away from his family right now, or I swear to God I will call the commissioner myself and have your badge for breakfast. Do you understand me?" The blood drained from Keith Rorick's face. The ruddy, confident complexion turned a pasty, sickly white. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at Elias, then at Anaya, and for the first time, he wasn't seeing a rowdy group. He was seeing something else, something he couldn't process. He was seeing power where he had only assumed inferiority. The junior officer, Peterson, took a deliberate step backward, physically distancing himself from the implosion he knew was coming. He looked at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere but at his senior officer. The manager, Daniel, who had been hovering helplessly, now looked relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted. The other diners were no longer trying to be subtle. Their phones were held high, a small constellation of lenses capturing every second of Rorick's spectacular self-destruction. The officer's hand, which had been resting so confidently near his weapon, was now trembling slightly as he held the phone. Elias calmly took the phone back from Rorick's limp grasp. "Antonio, it's all right. I think the officer understands now. I'm on my way." "Elias. 5 minutes. Don't you move. Sophia is calling the captain of that precinct right now. This is not over." The line went dead. Elias slipped the phone back into his pocket. He then turned his full attention back to the now floundering officer. The moment of vindication was potent, but it was not satisfying. All he felt was a profound, weary sadness. But it wasn't over. He wasn't just a friend of the restaurant owner. He wasn't just a doctor. He was a pillar of the very community this officer had sworn to protect and serve. And Officer Rorick was about to learn the full extent of his catastrophic misjudgment. "Officer Rorick," Elias said, his voice devoid of triumph, holding only the weight of grim necessity. "You should know that your actions tonight have consequences that will extend far beyond a complaint to your supervisor." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "My wife, who you've repeatedly insulted, is Dr. Anaya Vance. As of last Monday, she is the chief of pediatrics at City General Hospital, the very same hospital where your police union's health plan is administered. She sits on the oversight board." Rorick's eyes widened. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He looked at Anaya, who met his gaze with a look of cold, professional appraisal, as if diagnosing a sickness. Elias continued, his voice methodical, like a surgeon laying out the steps of a complex procedure. "And 2 years ago, I was the lead cardiac surgeon on a multi-hour emergency operation for a patient who had been in a catastrophic car accident. That patient's name is Robert Thompson. You might know him as Mayor Thompson. He awarded me the Mayor's Medal of Valor for my service to the city, the highest civilian honor one can receive. We have dinner with him and his wife every 3 months. The name of the mayor landed like a physical blow. Rorik visibly staggered, as if his legs could no longer support the weight of his own stupidity. This wasn't just a bad call anymore. This was a career-ending, life-altering cataclysm of his own making. The junior officer, Peterson, looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He was already composing his report in his head, making sure to document every single one of Rorik's biased statements, every illegal order. He was a witness now, not a partner. And finally, Officer, Elias concluded, delivering the final, decisive strike. The person I will be calling tomorrow morning is a woman named Cassandra Finch. She's the lead counsel for the state's ACLU chapter. She's also my sister-in-law. She specializes in cases of racial profiling and police misconduct. I imagine she will be very, very interested in the dozen or so videos currently being taken of this interaction. As if on cue, a collective awareness seemed to ripple through the room. The phones, which had been held up as passive recorders, now felt like active weapons aimed directly at Rorik. He was surrounded, trapped not by walls, but by his own exposed bigotry, reflected back at him from a dozen tiny screens. He finally found his voice, but it was a pathetic, stammering thing. Look, there was a complaint. I was just responding. It was a misunderstanding. It was not a misunderstanding, Anaya stated, her voice sharp with fury she had held in check for her children's sake. You looked at a black family enjoying a celebration and you saw a threat. You didn't see a doctor, or another doctor, or 2 honor roll students. You saw you people. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a choice. Your choice. Just then, the restaurant doors swung open again. This time, it wasn't a uniformed officer, but a man in a crisp suit with captain's bars on his collar. He was followed by a frantic Antonio and Sophia Moretti. The captain's eyes scanned the scene, the terrified family, the humiliated officer, the sea of cell phones, and landed on Elias. A look of instant recognition and horror dawned on his face. Dr. Vance, Captain Morrison said, his voice tight with disbelief and damage control. What in God's name is going on here? He strode forward, his gaze shifting to Rorik with an expression of pure fury. Rorik, what did you do? Before Rorik could sputter out another excuse, Antonio Moretti pushed past the captain. He went straight to Elias, embracing him like a brother. Elias, I am so sorry. So unbelievably sorry. He then turned to Anaya and the children. Are you all right? This never should have happened. Never. Sophia was right behind him, her arms around a now-crying Simone, murmuring comforting words in a mixture of Italian and English. Captain Morrison turned his attention to Rorik, his voice dropping to a furious whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. My office. Now. You are on administrative leave, effective immediately. Hand your weapon and your badge to Officer Peterson. Rorik looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Captain, I can explain. You can explain nothing. Morrison snapped. You have disgraced this uniform, this department, and this city. You have harassed one of the most respected men in this community, in front of his family, based on what? A feeling? Get out of my sight. Rorik, stripped of his authority and his arrogance, seemed to shrink. He unclipped his service weapon, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the latch. He handed it to a stone-faced Peterson, along with his badge. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, a broken man, followed by the cold, unforgiving eyes of every person in the room. The captain approached the Vances, his face a mask of professional regret. Dr. and Dr. Vance, on behalf of the entire department, I sincerely apologize. This is not who we are. Officer Rorik's actions are inexcusable and will be dealt with to the fullest extent. Elias looked at the captain, then at his family, who were now huddled together, protected by the Morettis. The apology, while likely sincere, felt hollow. It was a line spoken to mitigate liability, not to heal the wound. Captain Morrison, Elias said, his voice weary but firm. I appreciate your prompt response. But this will not be handled internally. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a man with a badge and a gun who targeted my family because we are black. What would have happened if I wasn't a surgeon who knew the mayor? What if I was just a man, a black man, trying to have a nice dinner with his wife and kids. Would I be on my way to a jail cell right now? Or worse? The captain had no answer. The question hung in the air, a damning indictment of the system he represented. The aftermath was swift and unforgiving. The cell phone videos, uploaded from a dozen different angles, went viral before the Van Cess even arrived home. The hashtag Bistro Bigot trended for 3 days. News vans were camped outside the 12th precinct the next morning. Officer Keith Rorick was fired within the week, his 2 decades of service erased by 15 minutes of unadulterated hate. The city issued a formal public apology. But for the Vance family, the resolution was not that simple. The victory felt tainted by the fight they never should have had to wage. 2 weeks later, represented by Cassandra Finch, they filed a $19 million federal lawsuit against Keith Rorick for civil rights violations and against the city for negligent hiring and failure to properly train its officers. The money, they announced, would be used to establish a charitable foundation dedicated to providing legal aid for victims of police misconduct who didn't have a direct line to the mayor or the head of the ACLU. One evening, months later, long after the settlement had been reached and the news cycle had moved on, Elias sat with Anaya on their porch, watching the sun set. The evening was quiet, peaceful. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Anaya asked softly, breaking the silence. Pursuing it so publicly? Elias took her hand. He thought of Simone, who for weeks had been afraid to speak above a whisper in public places. He thought of Jamal, whose simmering anger at the injustice of the world had been brought to a boil. "We had the resources to fight back, Anaya," he said. "We had the platform. If we had just accepted the apology and walked away, what message would that send? That justice is only for the well-connected? We did it for every family that looks like ours, who sits down for a meal and has to pray that it will be a peaceful one. We showed them that you can fight back. And you can win." It wasn't a celebration. It was a reclamation. A reclamation of their dignity, their peace, and their undeniable right to exist, to laugh, and to thrive in a world that still, too often, saw them as a disturbance. The fight had been exhausting, but in the quiet of that evening, holding his wife's hand, Elias Vance knew it had been necessary. It was a different kind of life-saving procedure, one performed not in an operating room, but in the harsh glare of the public eye, for the health of a community and for the future of his children.